Morning, Kristen. How are you?
I'm very well, Matt. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for joining me on this Friday morning. I know it's tough times with lockdown happening across the country, especially in where you're at in Sydney at the moment.
Yes, we're in lockdown probably for at least a month altogether, I would say, if not 6 or 8 weeks. So we're already in week 3 or 4. So and we've got at least another 2 confirmed. So yes, it's interesting times.
Yeah, tough. But luckily you're up somewhere quite nice in Sydney on the northern beaches, so not a bad spot to be in.
I am, yes. I've got a nice spot here in Collaroy. So close to the beach, good for walks and getting some fresh air when I get that opportunity. So yeah, I'm not complaining about where I'm locked down, let's put it that way. But yeah, it's more challenging for the kids, I think, as well.
Yeah, it is tough for them. It is tough. So, Kristen, you're founder and CEO of your own business, Hansen Performance. You're a sales and marketing and executive coach with over 20 years experience, and you've also got experience in the neuroscience of leadership and of learning. What's your background in these fields, and how did you get into coaching and into the marketing area?
Well, I guess my background started after doing school and doing a Bachelor of Business, majoring in marketing, and I then spent about 10 to 15 years in sales and marketing roles for large Australian organisations like News Limited and Fairfax and Pacific Dunlop. And reasonably early in my career started managing teams of salespeople or marketers, etc., and really found it fascinating, I guess, that leadership or the management side of managing salespeople. So that's when I studied coaching and realized that I really needed to take a different approach to getting the very best out of my team members, which became a lot more about asking them rather than telling them. And I really understood the power of coaching then. And so that was a really interesting phase. And then I thought, look, this is so powerful. I was getting such amazing results. I need to share this with other managers. So I left my corporate world behind, started my own business as an executive coach, sales marketing coach, and basically life coach, and then really fell in love with the idea of understanding how the brain works to be able to help people achieve their potential in any area or change or develop. And so I studied a master's in neuroscience of leadership through Middlesex University in the UK, and really started my own business and broadened that to be specializing in the neuroscience of leadership, sales and performance, which is all about everything from self-leadership, how you get the best out of your own brain, to how you get the best out of the brains of the people that you're working with or collaborating with, or living with for that matter. And then how do you, I guess, change yourself and rewire yourself for success? And so I think another area of passion, an area that I coach and train in, is from autopilot to accelerated excellence or accelerated achievement. So, you know, how do we shift our natural thinking and our structural habitual ways of doing things to new proactive intentional ways that are actually going to help us achieve our objectives?
Brilliant. Yeah, and I think based on that, you're the perfect guest to have on today. Of course, we're talking about Defence Force transitions and some of the adaptive changes that veterans go through when they leave service and move back to civilian life. So a couple of key things you pointed out there: asking versus telling. I mean, I was a pilot for just near on 18 years in Navy and Air Force, and rules, regulations, and orders and the rest of it really are the framework within which we're recruited, we're trained, we're grown, and we operate. And they keep us safe as military members. But when we leave the military, those things are left behind. And we're cast out into the big bad world. It's all up to us. And it's a different kettle of fish. It's a different way to operate.
It's very true. And with the work that I do at the Department of Defence as well, the fact that there is such a strong command and control sort of hierarchical and necessary for safety approach about you must do this and you must do it in this order, is also a typical historical management approach. It's not like it's just for, you know, typical in the services, etc. It's also very typical from an industrial revolution perspective and the way that businesses formed, which is, you know, you need to do it this way. And our managers even were very much command and control. But what we've recognized with availability and access to information is that people need to be self-motivated, if you like, to achieve something, and us just telling them that they need to do it isn't going to necessarily get the best out of somebody. So we need to tap into their intrinsic motivators. We need to help them set goals that, I guess, involve their whole brain so that they're engaged with the goals. We need to be able to help them have insights and aha moments about how to do things differently or see things differently or shift their mindset. And then we need to be able to help them, get into action without telling them what to do, but helping them come up with those next steps. So that's really, I guess, the coaching framework, if you like, for asking rather than telling, but you still create a really strong framework within which somebody moves forward, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. And if we look at this, particularly at the change in the adaptation, moving out of service, and the identity shift, what are the keys really, and the neuroscience really behind change, behind neuroplasticity, behind flexibility?
Yeah, so the brain is a highly plastic piece of anatomy that we have, but I guess it feels quite fixed and immutable. And until recently, neuroscientists actually thought that we developed our brain and it grew up, basically. And by the time we were 30, we had a fully formed prefrontal cortex and functioning brain, and it pretty much stayed as it was until we sort of ended up disintegrating somewhere down the end of our lives. But now neuroscience has proven that the brain is highly plastic, and this neuroplasticity that you talk about is the brain's ability to rewire itself basically towards whatever we want it to. So this self-directed neuroplasticity is the ability that you have to essentially send your brain into new pathways and new ways of thinking, new mindsets, new habits, etc., new structures that will help you achieve what you want to achieve. And obviously, as veterans, adjusting, I guess, from military to mainstream, or from being a veteran to civilian life, etc., there's massive shifts in everything that was habitual. So the structures, the value systems, the way that you operated on a day-to-day basis, the way you took, I guess, direction, the way you interacted with others, the way you had a social format, the way you were motivated, all of that was sort of, quite in a structured sort of way. And in a lot of ways now, this is about utilizing neuroplasticity to create your own new structures in a world that in some ways is devoid of some of those structures and those frameworks, and in other ways has new structures and frameworks and values in which you need to adjust. So neuroplasticity, understanding more about neuroplasticity can help you change yourself and rewire yourself. It's not a complicated process, even though it sounds a bit complicated, but it's not done very well, if that makes sense often.
Yeah, well, I guess recently years in particular, especially the last 10 years, there's been a lot more work and a lot more assistance provided to veterans in the transition space, but it's still something veterans struggle with. So in practice, how can we implement those steps to guide ourselves through that change and that adaptation process?
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing is you need to have a growth mindset. So it's pretty easy to have a fixed mindset, and this is what I think, this is how I work, this is what I do, this is what I believe in, this is how I operate, this is my personality, etc. And yes, to a certain extent, as a 40-year-old, a 50-year-old, a 30-year-old coming out of a very structured environment, yes, there's a lot of you that already exists. But if you have a growth mindset, essentially that means that you're prepared to embrace challenges, you're prepared to persist despite the obstacles, you're prepared to look at new ways of doing things and being. So if you have that growth mindset, that actually lends itself very well in the first place to neuroplasticity. And then you need to set some goals, and those goals could be in the area of, social or work, or the way you structure your health regime, or whatever it is. So having a goal and making sure the whole brain is involved for that. So the left brain, which might be really being clear on the measures and the time frame, those SMART goals that we set, but the right brain also is about how to basically utilize creative visualization. So imagining a future state for yourself, imagining that you have a social network, imagining you're in a career that's utilizing all your strengths and all your transferable skills from the military now into a civilian or a traditional workplace, if you like, or whatever it is, a new relationship, being really clear on that, and also knowing how you'll feel about that. What do you want to feel? So then you get the whole brain working for you rather than just one part of the brain, the left side of the brain typically. And then you need to pay loads of attention. And we call this attention density, which is attention, quality and quantity of attention to those goals. And there's obviously lots of things and steps that you can do to pay attention to those new ways of doing things. But then in the process, you need to give yourself positive feedback. So if it's improving your social setting and networking, for example, and you really don't like joining new groups and really find that uncomfortable, etc., and you think, oh, I just can't do that. Of course, it's about embracing that challenge and persisting despite the obstacle. And even if you rock up to some sort of meetup group or some social group or a new hobby or what have you, and you feel uncomfortable and you walk away and think, I don't want to be friends with any of them, or none of them get me, or none of them are my type, but you've got to give yourself a massive pat on the back because you did make that step. And you've got to see that a lot of this stuff, whether it be going for jobs or, and obviously you can do this in a more tailored and structured way, but part of it is just persisting despite those obstacles, because our brain doesn't feel comfortable in the new environments with new people necessarily, or a new way of working. But if we can do it a few times, it feels more comfortable, and suddenly it becomes something where we have developed a new pathway. So I think the key there is recognizing and giving ourselves positive feedback for those small incremental changes that we've made, sending out a CV or joining a network group or joining a gym or whatever it is that we've taken those steps to create a new way of doing things, and giving ourselves a pat on the back for that trying, that effort, even if it didn't result in perfection, and giving ourselves the encouragement then to try it again. So yeah, I think neuroplasticity isn't complex. We just have a barrier that stops us, and then we go, I can't do this. This is not for me. This is definitely not my cup of tea. And so we allow ourselves to be stopped in our tracks pretty easily.
I think that's the cornerstone of the conversation, really, is as veterans who've done a hell of a lot over our careers and in uniform, often in very dangerous places. It's hard to sometimes accept that, you know what, there's challenges in civilian life that are a lot safer, a lot less risky, but there's still things that are going to challenge us, and they're going to cause discomfort and fear and uncertainty. And going through those changes and pushing through with courage and acceptance of risk is part of that process.
Yes, and social pain is one of the biggest pains, actually. You know, you could be shot. That's a pretty bad physical pain. I get it. But social pain, that pain of rejection, or that pain of being isolated, or that pain of being just different and not fitting in, not included, etc., that can actually be a really discomfort experience as well. And so I think one of the things we've got to recognize as human beings is we are socially wired. And so that discomfort, actually research has shown that social rejection and isolation can set off the same brain regions as physical pain. So we are actually very subjective to those types of pains. And so we have to recognize that there needs to be a strategy to overcome some of those social pains, and recognize that they're real for everybody, and that even extroverts versus introverts experience social pain all the time, but they just push through it in some ways and sort of say, I know the gain of being able to meet 20 people and find 3 or 4 new ones that are of interest. So we do need to recognize that social pain is a real pain, but that the ability for us to move through that and have strategies to, I guess, come out the other side with some benefit, a new connection, a new relationship, etc., is worth that social pain as part of the process.
So how important is that positive feedback? So setting goals, taking action, having that ability to take the risk and try something new. How important is it to give ourselves feedback along that process and that journey?
Very important. I would like to share that when you're in a reward state versus a threat state, so when you're feeling happy, open, curious, calm, satisfied, etc., versus when you're feeling in a threat state, worried, concerned, anxious, annoyed, angry, etc., your brain physically harnesses completely different capabilities. So when you're in a reward state, your brain is open to risk, you're more connected naturally to others, and you empathize with others. You have more insights, more aha moments, more ways of moving forward. And you're solution oriented. Whereas when you're in a threat state, when you're feeling worried, anxious, concerned, annoyed, etc., your world closes in, your peripheral vision physically narrows, and it needed to. It needed to keep yourself safe. This is all about survival. The brain is all about survival. Minimize threat, maximize reward. Minimize threat, maximize reward. So your brain's scanning the environment for that all the time. And so as soon as you are feeling that threat state, your peripheral vision narrows, you're less connected to others, less empathetic, less solution-oriented, less insights, less aha moments, and you stay more in problem mode than in solution mode. So the very first thing you mentioned is how important is it for us to be positive. In a positive space, we actually can conquer a lot. And our mindset and our ability to reprogram ourselves and shift ourselves from threat back to reward is one of the greatest gifts and opportunities we have as humans, okay? Because that gives us the ability then to achieve things. So shifting from threat to reward is a key strategy that we need to be able to have so that we are being able to broaden and build, as Barbara Fredrickson said. That capability that the brain has in a positive mindset is really important. And so therefore, giving ourselves that positive feedback along the way becomes absolutely intrinsic to your ability to actually achieve a goal. If you are picking on yourself because you said, I'm going to run 5 times this week and you ran twice, and you go, see, I'm hopeless, I can't get fit anymore. I used to have so much, routine around being fit, and now it's easier to sit in front of the TV or do social media or whatever it is. If we pick on ourselves rather than saying, yay, I got out there and I didn't run 5Ks, but I ran 3 and walked the rest, and I did it twice this week, that's a huge achievement compared to what I was doing last week. So what's it going to take for me to do 3 next week? And giving ourselves that positive impetus to move forward, again, whether it be on the work front, the health front, the wealth front, the relationship front, the social front, whatever, giving ourselves that, positive feedback will help us reset and give ourselves that brain capacity to broaden, to see opportunities, to have aha moments, etc. So really shifting all the time can make a huge impact on our everyday achievements.
I think one other thing you hit on earlier was left brain versus right brain. I think there's been some talk of that being a misnomer or previous understanding of the brain logic. But from my perspective, really, and the way I've been thinking throughout my career, I've been all logical, planning, cognitive, quite light on the creativity and on the visualization. And you spoke about imagining the feelings we want to get out of a situation in the future. When I first heard that, in fact, it was a few weeks ago, reading a book by Brennan Burchard, High Performance Habits. And he was talking about just that thing, just picturing, visualizing the feeling you want to get out of a future situation, which to me felt and sounded absurd. How important are those aspects and getting the creative brain flowing and functioning again?
Yeah, I'm actually going to grab my brain, Matt, because I think it's easier to talk about that when I'm actually holding my brain rather than just talking about the brain. So what physically happens is, yes, the brain is a holistic thing, and it's not like you're just left-brained or right-brained. And yes, more of the anatomy of the brain that is to do with logic, sequential, numerical time frame is left brain, and more to do with the right brain is more imaginative, creative, etc., etc. And feeling and emotion is actually more of a deep part of the brain, etc. And people do relate it to the right side of the brain. But I like to think of the whole brain more than just the left or the right brain. If we want to, if you're an athlete, for example, we wouldn't just set a goal on a piece of paper for you to win the 100-meter race, in terms of running. We wouldn't just write, okay, I'm going to run the 100-meter race in X seconds, etc. If we were a coach, we would also say, what are you going to experience? What are you going to feel? What's it going to look like when you're in Tokyo and you run that race, etc. And you're going to be able to essentially imagine all of that. Now, when you imagine it, the key to this is that every single thought you have in your brain leaves a material trace. It is physically rewiring your brain. And the more you have a greater picture and imagination and feeling of a future state versus where you are, the more your brain gets into gear to work out, how do I get from here to here? And it's not just our cognitive prefrontal cortex, the thinking logical part of the brain, that gets involved to do that. It's your entire wiring in your brain, all your non-conscious, all the aha moments that happen when your brain is not active. That's why we have our aha moments mainly when we're in bed, in the shower, exercising, on the loo, or traveling. It's not when we're thinking about the problem. It's actually when our non-conscious brain has been, I got to work this out. I got to work out how to get from here to here, because I see this image and I feel this looks amazing, but I'm here and this is not cool. But the more that we have the opportunities to have a quiet prefrontal cortex, the more we'll also have those insight moments. It means we've activated the whole brain. And so if I were to ask you, Matt, for example, what would it look like in 6 months' time for you to achieve X? Tell me what you would see. Tell me 5 things you would see if you achieved X, what you would see. And if you describe those to me, you would more likely be going, and you'd look up and you'd quieten your brain. And in that process, when you're quietening your prefrontal cortex and you're looking at for the big resources in your brain, you're more likely to have an insight, because creative visualization activates alpha brain waves, which are the quieter brain waves, more likely to produce insight. And so that's how, through using coaching approach, either with yourself or having a coach, for example, or reading good books like this and reflecting on those questions, essentially coaching yourself allows you to create that tension between the here and the where you want to be, the now and the where you want to be, and your brain goes to work on that. And that's why the more you pay attention to that goal, not just how you're going to achieve it, but the actual outcome, the more you activate activity around that, even small, large activity, the more your brain will work on ways to bridge that gap. So that's a really powerful thing about getting the brain involved in the emotional side of the brain. If you think about it, emotion creates motion. If you are motivated to get to this end state, if you can really picture that end state, again, a great job that's activating all your passions and utilizing your past transferable experience and skills. If you're imagining that future state and you're feeling amazing about that new relationship, that new job, that social network, the new structure you have in your newly created life, etc., that feels comforting and brings about certainty for you, the more that you can really bring your brain alive on that, the more your brain will work hard with you consciously and non-consciously to achieve that. And that's unbelievable power of the brain that we have. I love that.
Absolutely extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. If we think about moving forward through our transition process and going into those new roles and the stresses that come up and the experience of dealing with those, what are the new approaches to self-management and regulation that we're finding that are really resonating with people out there in the corporate area and in the market?
Yeah. So I think the first thing to recognize is, yes, we are often going to feel threat. And actually everybody in corporate feels threat 60 to 70% of the time. So even if you are new to organizations or corporate and you think, oh, this has definitely got to be easier than being in the military and being shot at or being deployed or what have you. Yeah, there's a hell of a lot of threat out there in corporate world and organizations and things like that. So we do find that people need to have a strategy for recognizing when they're in a threat state and how to get back into a reward state. And so being mindful of, even asking yourself regularly, how am I feeling right now? And if you say I'm feeling frustrated or I'm feeling overwhelmed or I'm feeling concerned or anxious or whatever it is, just pick one. That's labeling the emotion. So that's a really important part of it. So we have essentially found that in research, there's a 30-second circuit breaker that we've put together through the 3 key things that can help you shift from threat to reward. And that's, first of all, deep breathing. Why? Because when you're in a threat state and your amygdala, so you've got the thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex, and you've got your amygdala hijack, which I'm sure many people have experienced. And that amygdala is that thing that keeps you safe, but puts you in that fight, flight, freeze mode. What physically happens essentially when you've noticed threat is your amygdala organizes blood flow, which contains oxygen and glucose, which is your fuel to think straight and to operate correctly. It organizes the blood flow to go away from the prefrontal cortex via the amygdala and heads it south to the heart, lung, limbs, so you can fight, flight, or freeze. And so that's really, helpful for our survival in a moment. However, it doesn't help us think creatively and get ourselves out of that situation. So if we're experiencing an amygdala hijack, or we just feel uncomfortable in a social setting and we can't speak English, and someone says, oh, so, how are you and what do you do? And you go, and you think, hello, where's my language? Why can't I speak English? That's essentially that you have experienced that small little amygdala hijack. And actually, the more you've experienced threat, the more your amygdala grows. So post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma-related aspects in the brain are basically an enlarged amygdala. So we need to work on shrinking your amygdala. That's one of the first questions people ask me is, can I shrink my amygdala? I've definitely been growing my amygdala. And that, therefore, the amygdala is more hypervigilant to more threat, because if it's grown and it's got more connections with the hippocampus, the memory center, it's more likely to say, threat, threat, you know, in social settings or being asked a question, you might get defensive. So if you've essentially trained your amygdala, all the services have trained your amygdala to be more hypervigilant, then one of the first things you need to do is regulate that. So breathe deeply adds oxygen back to the prefrontal cortex. Really important to get it to be able to regulate the amygdala. Your amygdala pops, does the amygdala hijack, your prefrontal cortex is diminished, add some oxygen back to your prefrontal cortex, label the emotion, give it a name. I am feeling frustrated, nervous, worried, etc. And then reappraise. How can I look at this differently? What can I learn from this experience? How can I put this into perspective? I'm actually okay. I'm sitting in a bar with a bunch of strangers. I don't get any of them. I don't understand any of them. I don't know that I'd connect with any of them, but I'm actually fine. I've got a drink in my hand. It's a nice environment. It's a good vibe. I'm not being shot at. I'm okay. You know, it's not that bad. I'll just sit here for a little while. So reappraising is really important as part of a regular 30-second circuit breaker that shifts you from threat to reward. Breathe, label, reappraise. We call that blah, blah, BLR, blah. Before you do anything, before you say anything, before you give up, you know, blah, breathe, label, reappraise. I remember when being separated and going to one of those meetups myself and feeling, you know, nearly 50 and rocking up to a bunch of strangers about to play futsal. I've never played futsal before. I've never kicked a ball before. And it was raining. And I'm thinking, what am I doing? I can't do this. This feels ridiculous. So I was about to text the one person to say, by the way, I'm not coming. And I thought, hang on a minute, breathe, label, reappraise. And I did that in the car park, soaking. And right in that process, I also got a text from that person saying, if you can't find us, we're just over here on the left. We've just come off for the rain, but it's going to clear in a moment. Good opportunity for you to say hello to a few people before you kick the ball. Don't worry, I've got your back. And I just thought, okay, I've got to go. But you know, that process of breathe, label, reappraise can sort us out in just so many little circumstances where we feel like giving up and we feel like it's too hard, but actually it's okay. And I ended up enjoying it and having a great time.
And that sounds like it's a tool that would get better and better the more you use it. Something that's probably hard the first time, even getting that cognitive center into action, getting the cortex working is going to be difficult.
100%.
Especially, it might be a reason for people who want to give up, but pushing through and building that skill set and building that new pathway is going to pay off in time.
Yeah, definitely. And we suggest that if you want to use something like blah regularly, that you actually do it 2 to 3 times a day. You put BLR in your phone as a reminder 3 times a day, and you do it no matter what the circumstance is, so that when you are in a threat, the first thing that does come to your mind is, I've got a strategy, blah. If you hear it once here for the first time and you think, oh yeah, that'd be interesting, I'm telling you right now, when you are in that social circumstance that's uncomfortable, or you're going for a job, and you don't know how to explain your transferable skills, or you're aiming to have a relationship and speak to somebody, you know, and you're just feeling uncomfortable about it because it feels like such a different environment, whatever it is, being able to draw on something that helps you in that moment. And basically one of the things we also say is be comfortable with the discomfort, because there's so much learning and so much growth that happens from discomfort. And I think as humans, we prefer to just avoid that discomfort, but recognizing that it's actually our support mechanism. And if we can push through it, we've actually grown, we've learned, and we actually can feel, you know, quite proud of ourselves, and then be ready to tackle another level of discomfort. And I'm sure, being in the military, there were many times when it was uncomfortable and, you know, you were forced, or you had to find a way of being comfortable with that discomfort. And then over time, some of those elements became more comfortable. So yeah, I think that's one of the key things that we've got to recognize about change, is it's not always a comfortable process, but we've got to push through it anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting perspective about the social aspect of it. We're so used to being under threat, whether that's physical threat, being under pressure, and having a rule set that really there's no room to negotiate. So the rules are there in place, they're there to be followed, and any deviation from those rules are going to get noticed. They're going to get debriefed by your superiors, they're going to get debriefed by the training system. So realistically, we don't have the option. But in our personal lives, our social lives, who's watching? No one. So a tool like BLR, breathe, label, reappraise, I think it's just really handy. It's something that veterans will resonate with, because drills and practice and preparation for combat and for threat environments, whether you're a pilot, whether you're in naval operations, whether you're a soldier, that's something that we do throughout our careers. So I think practicing that and being familiar with it is something that everyone can apply.
That's right. You've got to learn to comply with yourself. You've got to set your own rules, your own structures, your own goals. You've got to be your own sergeant major, or whatever you call drill sergeant, or whatever, that's going to kick your butt if you're not doing what you say. And part of that is learning, that self-coaching process to decide what you're going to achieve in a particular day, week, month, etc., and then stick to it. And know that you're going to find times when you're not going to want to do it, or you're going to find it challenging, or you're going to find obstacles that you hadn't encountered, and then bad luck. How are you going to find your way over that obstacle? Because, again, you've many times beaten so many obstacles that were mental, emotional, or physical obstacles throughout your careers. And it's about saying, how do I do that now? When I'm faced with such an array of new obstacles, and I don't have the strategies to get over them, and I don't have the strategies to get around them necessarily. But you can find them if you're resourceful. You can absolutely find them.
Yeah, to help us out there. And very glad we're talking about these things today for sure. So if we think now about changing the situation of working with a government organization, working within the military, to working out in the corporate sector and private practice, and the concept of personal brand and actual marketing oneself, what sort of changes are defense people going through when they change their mindset from being a service person, whether that's a leader, subordinate, both, then moving out there and having to brand yourself and having to be aware that every encounter and every conversation potentially is going to influence the way you're perceived by your employers or your peers?
Yeah, and I think, look, there are a lot of parallels and there are some differences for sure. So, you get promoted in the service as well by standing out, by doing a great job, etc., by making sure that not just what you do, but how you do it is noticed as a positive way. You're influencing others in a positive way, etc. So if you've had a career, I think in the military or what have you, there are still so many aspects of that are very relevant for how you personally brand yourself out in the real world, except that you probably have to reach out more. You probably have to do more proactively to communicate that, because there aren't necessarily people watching you. You actually have to be watched. You actually have to put yourself out there. I like to think about that you have to really be clear about what you're wanting to be and where you're wanting to, what skills that you have that you're wanting to use, what sort of role that you might want to have in the future. Again, you may not even know, but if you unpack a bit of who you are and your passions and the feedback and all of those sorts of things, get clear on the brand that you are, the image that you want to portray. Are you somebody that is proactive, strong? Is it something that you want to be shown to be, that you place a lot of value on initiating, that you are collaborative in the way that you approach things, that you are determined and dogged? Start thinking about what are some of the things that your service life has actually shown you about who you are anyway, and how many of those skills are really valuable and transferable into a new brand of yourself. And then think about also how you're going about influencing others. Once you've really thought about who you need to look like, feel like, and smell like, and represent yourself as, like, what is it that you need to do to show up every day then as that person? How do you demonstrate that to people more proactively? And then how do you collaborate or engage with others to help them understand who you are? So how do you show up in that way? Now, that could be through just picking up the phone and making connections with people that you've known in your vast family and friend network, etc. It could be speaking to other people from the military. What have they done? How have they gone about it? This is what I think I'm interested in. Where might that be? It obviously involves also speaking to recruitment companies. If you're looking for something specific, to start communicating those branding attributes that you have. And I think one of the downsides is not just explaining what you've done, but explaining how you've done it and who you are. And that's the message that you want to start communicating to people. Not, I've served this in the military and I had this rank file, etc., 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 and I went to this and I did this tour, etc. More and more people are looking to hire the person, and the skill set can be developed, but the person, who you are and what you believe in, what your values are, what you're motivated by, what you believe in, how you show up every day, that's what people want to engage with. So being able to articulate that really starts with A, your reflection piece, and then B, you just starting to communicate that to others. It could be to a friend, it could be to a relative, it could be to a coach, it could be to a peer group, it could be to a social group. It doesn't matter where you start, but being able to start purposefully describe yourself and who you are and what you stand for and how you like to operate gets you much more practice in that, as to when you obviously then also need to do that in interviews. But one of the things that I would say, if you are looking in the process of looking for a new role, is doing that bit of an audit of yourself and really working out those strengths and those areas of passion and the how you show up, and getting feedback, as I said, from others who know you, from the service, from your friends and family, etc. And then making sure that you are getting out there to communicate that. Sometimes people only look for that perfect job, and then they fail to get practice at communicating who they are through interview processes. So get broad before you get narrow is what I suggest.
I actually interviewed a former colleague a couple of months ago on the show, and he's running his own business and actually has had a lot of experience with veterans coming through. And some of them don't get through, they're not successful in getting the role, but they do receive really constructive feedback through the interview process. Is that part of the journey? Is that part of the process coming out of something like the military and then getting accustomed to the job interview process?
Yeah, and that's why I say, you know, get practice at that. Don't go for any job that someone will interview you in, even if you don't necessarily want the job, because you will get to learn who you are, how you show up, how other people see you, what you're being able to communicate clearly, what you're still tongue-tied on because you haven't done enough thinking about those answers. And that process is part of getting the great job. So the interview practice, if you like, is just a phenomenal part of getting that perfect job. And I think that's what holds people back the most, is they think, I want this job, or I don't even know what job I want, and I'm not sure if I could do this job. This job, I don't have experience in this, I don't have experience in that, but I've got all these traits, but I'm missing these 3 or 4 others. Doesn't matter. Rewrite that CV to focus on the areas of the strength that you have. Utilize those words that the recruitment person is really stressing in terms of what they're looking for and where you are aligned. Get an interview and then get the feedback, and see this as a learning process. That is so fundamental, because if you've had 10 interviews and you have not succeeded in all 10 of them, good on you, because you have learnt in every single one of them, especially if you take a reflective practice after each one. Get the feedback, yes, but even if they don't give you feedback, what did I do well on? What were the questions I knew how to answer? What were the questions I struggled? What has it shown me about what I talked about that my passion is and my area of expertise is? Jot that all down and make that, those 10 interviews, your learning experience about who you are, how you show up, how you're perceived by others, and exactly what your strengths and areas of transferable skill are that you can offer for those roles.
Great, Kristen. I think, again, a bit like the blah, the breathe, label, reappraise, taking the approach that this is a drill that I'm going to go through and that I'm going to refine over time and improve at to get a better outcome in the future. It's that growth mindset perspective, and it's about accepting that to begin with, we're not going to be great at something new. It's going to take time to build upon it and to refine that art. So great advice.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a key, because I think that the procrastination, the not doing something, is where we get stuck. So I say, try anything, try anything, because you will learn in every situation. And just being, again, comfortable with the discomfort of going for an interview and knowing you may not get that job, or you didn't get that job, and being comfortable with that, because you learned through the process, you rewired your brain somewhat to be more able, more flexible, more adaptive, based on the questions that you weren't prepared for. Great, I know next time there could be a question around that, and I have an idea how I might approach it next time.
Kristen, we've covered some really great ground today. I just think it's great bringing your expertise from mainly commercial industry, from marketing, advertising, from your coaching expertise, and bringing that across to defence members, and really pointing out that these are the skills that top paying executives and business leaders pay you for. And these are the exact skills that defence members and veterans now can employ to help them through their transition process and achieving success in life after service. So thank you for coming on, and thank you for sharing your secrets. Where can people reach out and contact you and find out more about you?
Well, our website, enhansenperformance.com.au, but very happy to just receive an email directly, kristen@enhansenperformance.com.au, or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm regularly posting on LinkedIn about some of the brain tips for the day, or things that I've learned from people, about how to build your social and emotional intelligence, or your ability to do better decision making, or your ability to influence others, or your ability to just have a strong mindset to persist despite the obstacles. So yeah, absolutely, just reach out either via email, via LinkedIn, and we can share a little bit more about some of the things that we have available in groups to help you shift from autopilot as well to accelerated achievement in any area that you're working on. So thanks very much for your time today as well, Matt. It's really been enjoyable talking with you.
Kristen, thanks for coming on. I think veterans are going to get a lot from this episode. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks. See you later.